Welcome, K-12 educators. If you've ever felt this massive gap between the curriculum you're handed and the real lived experiences of your students, well, you are in the exact right place. Today, we're taking deep educational research and real-world classroom articles and transforming them into a dynamic, professional development session for this explainer. We're going to unpack critical pedagogy, principles, and classroom applications. Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our agenda for today's workshop. We'll start with the classroom disconnect, trace the theory and historical roots, look at 5 principles in action, rethink the classroom paradigm, cover how to avoid common pitfalls, and finish up with your implementation roadmap. Section 1. The classroom disconnect, addressing educator realities. We've all been there, right? It's October, you're teaching the exact same history chapter you've taught for years, and you can literally feel the disconnect in the room. You see the missing voices, the way the curriculum makes history feel finished instead of ongoing, and then that inevitable moment happens. A student raises their hand and asks the ultimate question. Why are we learning this? It's a completely fair question, and critical pedagogy, it gives us a framework to provide an honest answer. It's a philosophy that looks at how power, culture, and politics actually shape what we call knowledge. It's all about showing students how classrooms can either reproduce the status quo or, actually interrupt it. To really understand this, we kind of have to look at what it opposes. The famous Brazilian educator Paulo Freire critiqued traditional education as the banking model. Essentially, this model treats students as empty vaults just waiting to be filled up with pre-approved facts by the teacher. Knowledge is just deposited. Freire argued that this method totally shuts down critical dialogue. It conditions students to be passive receivers instead of active, liberated thinkers. It asks them to just adapt to the world as it is, rather than imagine what it could be. Section 2. Theory and historical roots. From the Frankfurt School to the classroom. Let's move to and see how this builds, because this isn't just some fleeting trend. In the 1920s, scholars at the Frankfurt School started critiquing positivism, this idea that science and facts are perfectly neutral. By the 1930s, Italian thinker Antonio Gramsci developed the concept of hegemony. And then, jumping to 1968, Paulo Freire published his massive game-changer, Pedagogy of the Oppressed, based heavily on his adult literacy work in Brazil. This whole framework traces back to a very deep scholarly foundation. Critical pedagogy originally emerged to make sense of the social destruction and class inequalities of the 20th century. Theorists were trying to figure out why the promises of the Enlightenment kept failing marginalized communities, and they wanted an educational theory aimed explicitly at human emancipation. So let's build out a quick glossary so we're all on the same page. First up, hegemony. This is the way dominant groups make their worldview seem like common sense to maintain power. Proponents argue that traditional education is never truly neutral. Even when we think we're teaching just the facts, the argument is that schools quietly train students to adapt to existing power structures. Next up is praxis, the continuous cycle of reflection and action to transform the world. In your classroom, praxis means moving way beyond surface-level tasks. For instance, running a canned food drive, that's charity. But praxis would be having your students analyze the actual root causes of food insecurity in their neighborhood, reflecting on that data, and taking informed action, like presenting their findings to the city council. And finally, conscientization. This is the process of waking up to how social and political forces shape your daily experience. Critical pedagogues view this awakening as the ultimate goal of what they call problem-posing education. You aren't just talking at students, you're posing problems using their own realities, respecting what they already know, and helping them analyze their world.
Section 3. 5 Principles in Action. Translating Theory to Practice.
There are 5 core principles here, and they all feed into each other. It starts with dialogue as a democratic practice, meaning real reciprocal communication. That fuels praxis, which leads to conscientization. Underpinning all of this is the understanding that curriculum is politically situated, and it absolutely relies on authentic student agency. If you skip these deeper elements, you just end up with surface-level rituals. Moving your desks into a circle is completely meaningless if it doesn't actually include true student-generated inquiry. Section 4. Rethinking the classroom, transforming the educational paradigm. Now, what's really interesting is when you compare the traditional model directly against the critical model. Look at the shift in your role as the teacher. You move from the sage on the stage, dominating maybe 80% of the talk time, to a facilitator talking only 40 to 50% of the time. Knowledge shifts from being received truth to being co-created, And assessment moves away from standardized tests toward authentic demonstrations, like public exhibitions. Of course, this has to be scaffolded depending on who you're teaching. In elementary school, the focus is on concrete fairness. One great source example had third graders mapping who had access to the comfy chairs in the library and proposing a fairer rotation. By middle school, it shifts to identity and media representation. And by high school, students are ready for abstract, systemic action, like mapping out community food deserts. It's also important to note that critical pedagogy is not just one single thing. There are different branches. Culturally sustaining pedagogy treats home languages as cognitive assets. Reality pedagogy validates youth cultural capital as serious academic currency. Anti-racist pedagogy focuses heavily on equity audits, while public pedagogy extends learning completely outside the classroom walls. Section 5. Avoiding common pitfalls. Keeping the practice authentic. Let's be totally honest, this work is hard. It is so easy to fall into a few common traps. First, confusing chaos with student-led learning. Removing all structure does not create critical consciousness. It just creates noise. Freedom requires really strong scaffolding. Second, neglecting standards just to be relevant. Critical inquiry must actually exceed state standards, not ignore them. And third, falling into the teacher as savior narrative. If you're thinking, I'm giving them a voice, you're centering yourself. Authentic problem posing means the students generate the problems themselves. Section 6. Your implementation roadmap. A first semester action plan. So the crucial point is to start small. Step 1. Audit your current curriculum. Literally count the historical figures in your textbook by race and gender to find the dominant narratives, and just pick 2 to disrupt this semester. Step 2. Establish community agreements. Spend a few weeks practicing dialogue with low-stakes topics like, does pineapple actually belong on pizza? So students learn how to respectfully disagree. And step 3, pilot just one unit using problem-posing essential questions. We have covered a massive amount of ground in this explainer today, moving from the philosophy of Paulo Freire all the way to actionable steps for your own classroom, which leaves us with one final, deeply provocative challenge. How will you disrupt the status quo in your classroom tomorrow? Will you simply deposit facts, or will you spark a critical consciousness? Thank you so much for joining us.